I'm Doug Richardson, and this is photography the way I see it. Hey YouTube, this is Doug Richardson, and welcome back to another episode of Photography the way I see it. Today we're going to do a quick one. We're basically just going to talk a little bit about lenses. I'll talk more about lenses in another episode, but I just want to say I appreciate those of you who have been following along. I also wanted to explain just a brief explanation of this series before I get back into it on the lenses here. This series is starting out very, very basic for people that have just bought a camera or thinking about buying a camera, wanting to know what all is involved with doing photography. And I'm talking about actual photography before the button is pushed, not photography as let's just see what I get and then go into Photoshop or another similar program later on and then, do different effects or do different things there. This is about actual photography, okay? So if you're an advanced amateur or a professional, some of these episodes might not be for you. You are certainly welcome to listen along. I'd love to have you. But I just want you to know that this is why that a lot of these episodes are staying very basic. It's for people that need the help so that they can get up where they want to be, whether it be an advanced amateur, advanced hobbyist, or maybe one day they may want to turn professional. So I just wanted to explain that briefly here. So we'll get right into it here. If you're going to buy a camera, and you're going to buy a camera and a lens, and you're going to be done, other than maybe a flash and some other accessories. Now, there's a lot of kits out there that will give you like a 15 millimeter lens, or I'm sorry, I said 15, a 50 millimeter lens with the camera. That's just your basic run-of-the-mill lens, okay? The lenses that I recommend that you have, if you're only going to have one lens, that one lens I would recommend would be a zoom lens going from somewhere in the vicinity of 24 millimeters up to 70 or 80 millimeters, such as a 24 to 80, 24 to 70, even an 18 to 70 or something like that in that range. Why? You have some wide angle coverage and you also have a little bit of telephoto coverage. And if you're just an average person that wants to take some nice pictures on vacation, things of that nature, that is the lens for you. Okay? That's all you'll ever need. Now, if you decide, well, I got a grandchild or a child that plays soccer, I would like to have a little bit, I don't need a huge lens, but I would like to have a little bit of more of a telephoto, and I'll explain what that is here in a second. You might want to go with an 80 to 200, like maybe an 80 to 200 f4 lens, which would be about the same on the other, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. If you have those two lenses, if you're going to have a collection of lenses and you have at least those two, you're starting at 18 to 24, which is going to cover your wide angle area, and you're going up to 200, which is going to take you at everything in between up to 200. That's what I would recommend. As far as I'm concerned, if you're not doing it professionally and you're just doing it as a hobby, unless you're getting into some heavy sports shooting, that's all you're ever going to need, other than you want some kind of special effects lens like a fisheye or something like that. But just generally speaking, that is all that you're going to need. Okay? Now, I want to talk a little bit about f-stops on the lens. You'll see different lens. Why is this 400 millimeter lens $120 and this one's $12,000? They're both 400 millimeter lenses. We talked in earlier episodes about the f-stops. The smaller the number on the lens, let's say on the f-stop, let's say 2.8. Okay? That's going to be, if it's a 2.8 lens, that means that lens is wide open and you're getting a 2.8 f-stop. That lens is going to be a lot more expensive than something that, say, only goes open as wide as, let's say, a 5.6. So, generally speaking, the wider the maximum f-stop, okay, the more expensive that lens is going to be, generally speaking. Okay? Now, what you have to watch for when you're buying lenses, and I'm going to put a graphic up here somewhere. On the lens, for example, if I might buy a, let's say I buy an 80 to 200 2.8 lens. Because it's a 2.8, it's going to be expensive. It's probably going to be in the mid-thousands. 1500, 1400, somewhere in that range, because it's a 2.8, might have a little image stabilization and stuff like that. But if it's a true 2.8 lens, that means that whether I'm shooting at 80 or whether I have it zoomed all the way to 200, that lens is still giving me a 2.8 opening. Okay, on the lens it'll say something to the effect of 1:2.8. It's a 2.8 lens. If you buy a lens that says, for example, 1:4, and then a little, some of them have a dash and some of them have a squiggly line or whatever, and then after it'll say like 5.6. Well, which is it? Is it a 4 or is it a 5.6? I don't understand. What they mean by that is when your lens is at the shortest focal length, let's say 80, okay, you are shooting with a 2.8 lens or 4 lens, whatever the lens is, okay? If it's a 4-5.6, when that lens is wide open, you are shooting at f4. As you zoom the lens and the lens becomes more powerful, the subject starts to come closer, that lens is going to darken. When that lens darkens, it's because you're zooming and the lens is not a true 4 lens all the way through. It's only a 4 at the shortest focal length. When you get to 5.6, you are now shooting with a 5.6 lens. So if you're doing a manual exposure, okay, especially if you use the light meter has no idea what you have on that camera, okay, and you zoomed, you just darkened that picture. So that's why those lenses are cheaper, because they're not truly the same brightness all the way through. Okay, I call that, I don't know if this is a proper term, you may not, if you Google it, you may not find it, you might, but my term for that's the sliding f-stop, meaning that here's my f-stop, oh, where to go? I started to zoom, but I lost my f4, where to go? Well, as you were sliding the lens, you lost it because it changed itself to a 5.6. That is only on lenses that designate 2 f-stops as the brightness of the lens. If it says it's an 80 to 200 f4 lens, then it's going to be f4 all the way through. If it says 80 to 200 f4-5.6, that's where the flag goes up saying, well, wait a minute, there's 2 f-stops there. That means that as I zoom, it's going to get darker. But those lenses are cheaper, so it's a matter of weighing your pros and cons and your budget and things of that nature. But basically, those are the 2 lenses I recommend. If you're only going to have one lens, do the shorter one, because if it's too bright, you're going to have problems when you're inside of a house, or if you're somewhere and you want to take a group shot, you're not going to be able to back up far enough. So stay with that. Now I'm going to get into some things that a lot of people don't know. There's pros out there that don't know this, but this goes back to the photography days where we shot film on a 35 millimeter camera. The human eye sees at 50 millimeters. What I mean by that is, when I look at a subject, whatever that subject happens to be, with the naked eye, and if I shoot with my camera and I shoot a 50 millimeter lens, that picture, the subject, is going to look the same distance that I'm seeing it with my naked eye. It's all based on 50 millimeters. We're not going to talk about lens conversion yet. I think that's part of, I might even get into that today. I don't know. But what that means is this. If you've used binoculars or a telescope, they go by power. Well, how powerful is that binocular? What's an 8x? It's a 12x. Well, what does that mean? It brings it 12 times closer, is what that means. But what about lenses? Lenses aren't marked that way. They're marked in millimeters. So how do I know what the power of my lens is? It's very simple. If you remember that the human eye sees at 50 millimeters, and remember that number, 50, okay? All it is a simple mathematical equation. If I'm using a 100 millimeter lens, how many times does 50 go into 100? 2. So it's a 2 power lens. It's a 2x lens. If I'm using a 400 millimeter lens, well, this has nothing to do with the f-stop, okay? If I'm using a 400 millimeter lens, let's see, what x would that be? 400 divided by 50, 8. So that 400 millimeter lens is an 8 power lens, equivalent of an 8 power telescope or a binocular. That's how you figure that. Okay? Now here's where it kind of gets a little confusing. Different digital cameras have different lens conversions. And I call it a lens conversion. There might be another technical term for it, but if there is, I'm not sure what it is. But I call it a focal length lens conversion. I don't have anything to show that. Well, maybe I'll just demonstrate it on this paper here. All right, let's say, these are my notes. Let's say that when you look through a 35 millimeter film camera with, let's say you got a 400 millimeter lens on there, okay? That 400 millimeter lens is using the entire frame, okay? Some of them 97%, but let's say it's 100, okay? All right, when I look through the camera, this is what I see. Everything from corner to corner through my camera. And that's looking through a 35 millimeter camera. Now, let's say I go out and buy a digital camera. And that digital camera has a 1.5 lens conversion because of the sensor that it's using. If you look through the front of a 35 millimeter camera with no lens on it, you're going to see one thing. But if you look through the front of the lens on a digital camera, you're going to see something different. It's going to be smaller. It's not going to be as big as the 35 millimeter. So what happens is, a 400 millimeter lens, if you put that on the digital camera is only going to use a small portion of that area. Okay? So, if I have something filling my frame from bottom to top, which you'd never want to do that, but this is just as an example. If I have something that fits in my frame from bottom to top, and I take it and put it on a digital camera and stay the same distance, okay, I'm only going to be viewing now from here to here all the way around. And I just cut off part of my image because my lens just got stronger because the camera is only using more of a center portion of the lens, okay? So if I'm using, I know these lenses are expensive, but it's easiest for me to use as an example. Let's say I'm using a 400 2.8 lens, okay? I take my 400, and let's say the lens conversion is 1.5 to make math easy. So I take 1.5 times 400, that is 600. I am now using a 600 2.8 lens on that camera, because I gained some focal length because the sensor, and the higher the lens conversion, the smaller the sensor, because the sensor is going to keep going far and farther and farther towards the center of the picture. That's how you get the conversion. You don't lose light. If you use a converter, for example, you go out and you buy a 1.4 converter because you want to convert that lens, okay? Well, when you convert with a 1.4, you lose a stop of light. So you're not getting the same 2.8. You don't need the converter. If you want the converter, you're going to lose. If you buy a 1.4 converter, you're going to lose one stop of light. If you buy a 2x converter, you're going to lose 2 stops of light. But that's how you know. You have to know your camera to know what millimeter you're actually working with. So technically, we have to do the math. I haven't done it ahead of time, but it's probably going to be somewhere. I told you 50 millimeters is what the human eye sees. In the digital era, when you put the lens on the camera, if it converts it above 50, well, you got to find out what lens you can use to get it to 50 after the conversion. So it might be a 35. If I buy a 35 millimeter lens, multiply that by 1 point, whatever my conversion is. If it equals close to 50, that's my new lens size for standard, for a magnification. And then you do the math again from there. I know it's kind of confusing, but that's how it works. I don't know any easier way to explain it. But that's why you actually have more of a lens after the conversion, because it only uses more of a center portion of that lens. Another thing, last thing I want to talk about today, is the difference between a zoom and a telephoto lens. A zoom lens means that it has multiple focal lengths. Like I said earlier, 28 to 80, 80 to 200, 18 to 70, whatever you happen to have. If it goes over 50, that makes it a telephoto because now it's starting to bring things closer. If it doesn't hit 50, then it's not a telephoto zoom, it's a wide angle zoom. If it covers it, then you got it. Okay, so a zoom lens, multiple lens magnifications. A telephoto lens, just a telephoto lens, is if you would go out and buy like a 200 millimeter lens. Well, why would I want to do that? Well, again, it's based on what your type of photography is. If I buy a 200 millimeter lens, it's 200 no matter what. I can't zoom. I have to either move in or back up. I can't zoom the lens. The only advantage is on the telephoto lenses, it's less, even though they're more expensive lenses, but more bang for your buck. It's easier to get a brighter lens when it's a telephoto than a zoom. Because if they can say it's a 4 lens all the way, you're all the way through because you're not zooming. But that's the difference between a zoom and a telephoto. Zoom, multiple lengths. Telephoto, you're stuck with one length. Okay, but typically you can get more bang for your buck on the f-stop. Okay, so if I've confused you today, I'm sorry. I'm trying to do the best I can. And I do want to go over, just generally speaking, again, I think I did it in episode 1. These earlier episodes in this series are based on people that are just starting to get into it. If you're an advanced amateur, professional, these probably aren't for you, although please stick around. I'd love to have you. But that's what that's going to be for all the way through this. I'm going to make as many as I can. The next one is going to be if things go as planned. As of right now, I'm on schedule. But if things go as planned, the next one's going to be a little bit of light control. Now, an amateur that just wants to shoot around, if you just want to know how it's done, that's fine. This might not be for you. It might be for you. You're certainly welcome to watch. I'm trying to get a hold of some umbrella, but I'm going to try to get into a little lighting control, showing some reflectors, umbrellas, gobos, scrims, letting you know a little bit about what all that does so you have an idea of what's going on. But, okay, I've taken enough of your time, and thank you very much for coming back to another episode of Photography the Way I See It, and we'll see you on the next one.